Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here. It is Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. Back in the office in Wilmington, North Carolina. Good to be with you here. We need to talk about the forecast that came out yesterday from the UKMET office in England. Still calling for a very, very busy season. So that's the question. Drop me out just for a second. Will this be an epic season like some of these models are predicting, the different guidance pieces that we look at? Or are they going to bust epically and the El Nino takes over, shears everything out, creates sinking dry air, all that kind of stuff, and we sort of escape with a non-impact kind of season, very low numbers, all of that kind of, yeah, that's what would be epic, right? An epic bust. I don't know, and you don't know either for sure, so that's why we're all here trying to figure it out together. I'll look at different things that people are saying, some of the forecast parameters that are out there, and we'll move forward as we are now in the month of August. Traditionally, especially later in the month, that is when historically things should start to get busier. All right, so let's start off with a look at the National Hurricane Center first. There's Dora, overperforming in my opinion. I didn't think it was going to do much. Of course, I was basing that on the GFS, which has just been pretty bad this year operationally. But yes, Dora has taken advantage of some pretty favorable conditions. It's now on the cusp of becoming a major hurricane. This is what it looks like over from Dr. Cowan's website. Not very impressive right now on satellite imagery. It's kind of losing that very well-defined eye from earlier. It is moving to the west-southwest, so it's moving south of due west over the Pacific. Just kind of an interesting small system, not going to impact land, and it's just going to add a few ace points to the Eastern Pacific score, accumulated cyclone energy. That's what ACE stands for. Other than that, things are generally quiet. Let's just click on the home button up here. In the Atlantic Basin, we do have what was this, 96L? I guess it still is, yep. 10% chance of development. If we just look at the overall background map that the Hurricane Center uses for their graphical tropical weather outlook, this is what it looks like. It's going to get tangled up in this troughiness out here. But then a couple of pretty robust tropical waves, and then even more sitting over Africa. There's another piece of energy approaching Central America, but it's not quite prime time yet in the Atlantic. Hint, hint, it's dry air. We still have what we call stability issues. The air is just too dry in the mid-levels. It does literally take a few more weeks for climatology to kind of tip the scales in the favor of a more active period. Intra-seasonal, that's I-N-T-R-A, intra-seasonal, different things that come through, like these Kelvin waves we talk about, maybe even some Madden-Julian oscillation activity, all fancy words for saying, hey, later in the month, the signals are there for things to start to get busy, and I think once they start, they're not going to stop for quite a while. Kind of like what we saw in 2004. That's what this reminds me of, at least for now. All right. Let's move over to this tweet here yesterday from Dr. Phil Klotzbach, and this is very, very interesting. The UKMET office continues to call for an extremely busy 2023 Atlantic hurricane season with the most likely numbers of 19 named storms total, not counting the subtropical one that formed in January. The UKMET looks at June through November. That's it. 9 hurricanes, so we'd have 8 to go. But 6 of the 8 that are left, because we've already had Don, that was the first hurricane, 6 of them becoming Category 3 or higher. And wow, so we would have several more. Let's see, they're calling for 19 total. We have had Arlene, Brett, Cindy, and Don, so we still have 15 more to go. Basically cramming an entire hurricane season into possibly the next 90 days or so. I know the hurricane season goes through November, but August, September, October, especially this year, things will probably get very, very busy with lots of activity, taking advantage of all of the very favorable conditions that are out there. What are those conditions? Well, you can go over here. Yes, I'll accept your cookies. Thank you. We'll go over here. If you click on the link that Dr. Klotzbach provided, this is what you get. And after you accept their cookies, you're good to go. And you can read about what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, and the different numbers that they show here, the ranges. And the most likely, there's your 19 named storms, 9 hurricanes total, 6 of them becoming major hurricanes. And this is very, very important right here. The accumulated cyclone energy, that's the wind output, of 215, with the low end of 120, which is just slightly, let's call it normal. There's the long-term average, 123. If you look at the 30 years prior, it would be a little bit above normal, whatever. The low end would be a normal season. And then that 310 up there, if we hit that, well, let's just hope we don't. But it is interesting that the ceiling is 310 ace points. That is like West Pacific, long-lived, really powerful typhoon-type ace numbers there. The accumulated cyclone energy, that is the total output of energy from all of the systems in the Atlantic. I'll put a link to this in today's description if you'd like to read it. They have done pretty well overall. They can brag about it because they have done well. They did great looking at 06 compared to 05. This is a while back now, right? They've done even better since then. In 2017, the Met Office there in the United Kingdom successfully predicted the above-average activity that was observed in the North Atlantic, including the high frequency of tropical cyclone tracks around the Northeast Caribbean. And they cite their work. If you'd like to dig in deeper and look at some of these references, it's all available on the internet. And I know you say don't believe everything you read on the internet, but this is legit science. They've done a really good job, and you got to start somewhere, right? So yes, that's an interesting tweet for sure. Why did it come to this? Well, of course, this map, all these warm anomalies in the Atlantic. There's your El Nino, but it's mostly confined to the East Pacific, and those, among other reasons that they cite in their update, are continuing to call for a very busy season. Even the Reynolds method here, which looks at a weekly, I guess they're back to daily, sorry. So the daily averages, look, your 1 Celsius is just everywhere. So everything's basically a degree Celsius or warmer. And then you've got this pretty large island of, I guess, 1.5 degrees, and then this large area here in the main development region of 2 Celsius, the very warm North Atlantic. There's no negative anomalies in the North Atlantic right now to speak of. And so that really helps to bolster this idea of a very active hurricane season. We can go back and look and ask the computers, looking at data, what were the temperatures like? What was the setup that gave us active seasons? It's like looking up a database of fingerprints to try to determine who a criminal is. There's a crime committed, you look at the fingerprints and other data, forensic analysis, and you try to figure out who the culprit is. Same thing when we try to identify, in this case, a future hurricane season. Well, what were the past hurricane seasons like that were busy? And this really helps to fit that mold, except for the El Nino. And that's a wild card for sure. Speaking of El Nino, Adam here tweeting at me earlier, he and several other people, I do like this about social media. I don't get bombarded by a lot of nonsense, and I think that's fantastic. Part of that, I think, is because I try to just shoot straight and tell you like it is, and I don't create a bunch of controversy myself. And so I don't generate a bunch of crazy comments or messages from people. I really don't. I don't just block them and filter them out. I don't get them. And I do get this helpful insight from people that are watching this stuff as close, if not closer than me, because a lot of people have a vested interest in what happens across the tropics. They really do, and all of weather as far as that is concerned. So this interesting tweet at me over on Twitter. I'm never going to call it anything other than Twitter. That's just me. Look, it even still says it right there, tweet. Anyway, Adam says, a fair bit has changed in a month, but this is not what you expect to see for an El Nino that is to strengthen and maintain. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. And what he is remarking about is that we have developed this cold pool in the depths here, right, since we have gone forward in time. All right, so this is July 2nd. Now we're at August 1st. Look at how this has made some inroads, and this has eroded just a little bit. The intensity just isn't there. Let's use white to sort of make this. Nope, that's not going to work. We use, blue. There we go. So back in July, this was a little stronger. Not as strong now, so it has backed off a little bit. And our cold pool has advanced over here to the subsurface Central Pacific, and that is not going to reinforce that. Basically, there's none of this here waiting over here to get shoved to the east, upwelled, and spread across and just reinforcing all the warmth. That's the simplest way to look at it. Here's another way to look at it. I like this product here from the CPC, Climate Prediction Center. There is our cold area trying to literally erode all this warmth up here, which is now shrunk and confined to the eastern Pacific. Yes, we still have a pretty broad El Nino out here, but as I pointed out the other day, if we compare that to the broad scale warmth of the entire Atlantic basin here, this is way more than this. You ever see that? You know, those pluses, what is it? They say like such and such is greater than such and such. Right now, the Atlantic is greater than the Pacific in terms of the anomalies. It's dominating. It absolutely is. There's just more warm water in the Atlantic than there is in the tropical Pacific, and therefore the different modeling, the guidance that we look at, people at the UKMET office, Dr. Klotzbach and his colleagues, the people at Arizona, University of Arizona, other companies that are forecasting tropical cyclones, and they are trying really hard. They're not just throwing darts out there, you know, and to see what sticks. They want to try to figure this out, but nature and weather is hard to figure out. But boy, you look at that, you say, come on. The Atlantic is overwhelmingly warmer than the Pacific. They're not equal. The Atlantic's way higher. It is a heavyweight compared to the El Nino, but historically, El Nino does tend to knock down the Atlantic because of wind shear generally, but we're not seeing that just yet. All right, moving on along. This is very important now that we're getting into August. Actual water temperatures in the upper 80s to almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you look at it scientifically, pretty much everything in science is metric, right? Yes, it is. 31 Celsius, covering a huge area of the northern Gulf here, all around the western peninsula of Florida, and then even higher numbers. At least we shaved off some of those 32 Celsius, but it's not going to matter. If the atmosphere cooperates and we mix out and change this dry air and we reduce the shear from where it is now, and it's changeable all the time, you don't need me to tell you. I think you can just figure out. You get a track, and I'm just saying something like Ida that came up roughly into here. Over those kinds of temperatures, we are setting ourselves up for the potential of very intense hurricanes. But that's wind and pressure. All of that warm water also will lead to extraordinary rainfall. And that's another thing we need to really start thinking about, that even a tropical storm, and people could say, well, it's just a tropical storm, but all of that extra warm water is probably going to lead, and I'm speculating a little bit here, but I believe some of the people that I know in NOAA, at the Weather Service, that work in the Weather Prediction Center and elsewhere would agree that these high water temperatures, higher than they should be, would give us higher precipitable water in the atmosphere. So even a weak hurricane, or just a tropical storm, quote unquote, could dump tremendous amounts of rain, even if they're not necessarily slow moving. I think we're already seeing that with these excessive rains that we're seeing lately. You think about Vermont recently, Mayfield, Kentucky recently. Yes, the rainfall and the warm atmosphere are connected. All right, off of my neck of the woods, again, I am in Wilmington, which is right here. Water temperatures off the southeast coast, toasty, right, you know, where they should be, maybe a little bit warmer than average overall. 28, 29 Celsius, then you've got your 30 Celsius, mid to upper 80s out here in the Gulf Stream. Everything is ripe and ready. If the atmosphere cooperates, we're going to have some major problems. Luckily, looking at the GFS at the 850 millibar level from today's run right there, it's about 5,000 feet up in the atmosphere. Let's just stretch this out over the next week or so. Now, there's one little feature that tries, but man, the GFS has just been lately on the operational side. Maybe we should start looking at the Euro more, but it hasn't done a whole heck of a lot better overall. It was very aggressive with Brett and Cindy, as I recall. Even its ensembles were very aggressive with 96L, and 96L never developed. So the models, maybe they're struggling too with all this extra heat. I don't know. It's just very weird. But at least nothing is showing up on the guidance over the next week or so. So for the next 7 days, we can at least relax maybe a little bit, get those hurricane plans in order, because I think you're going to need them. And then finally, just wrapping things up, the warm water is important. Of course it is. We don't have tropical cyclones without water that's at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 26 Celsius, or higher, typically, most cases. But that's not enough. You see all this out here? This kind of stable-looking cloud deck, just not much convection, pretty clear overall. That's your dry air. The Saharan air layer still coming off Africa. Some dust, but it hasn't been particularly heavy this year. No major, like, headline-grabbing dust outbreaks like we've seen in recent years. And that's part of the reason why the Atlantic has warmed the way it has, is the dust does help to filter the sun a little bit, right? And the absence of it leads to more incoming solar radiation. But that look right there, I can just say, hey, look, yeah, that's a pretty stable atmosphere. And until that changes, the water temperatures could be 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're not going to get hurricanes to develop because you've got to have a moist mid-level atmosphere. Now look at the date, August 2nd. What will this look like on August 20th? The typical ringing of the bell, as Dr. Bill Gray, the late Bill Gray, used to do. Many people in hurricane science regard mid-August, the last third or so, or the last half, the 20th on or the 15th on, you decide, as the traditional start of the real hurricane season. I think most people know that. June and July, you get random developments, and in certain years like 05, 2020 as examples, you get a lot of development way outside August and September, and the whole 6 to 8 months or whatever, hurricane season just stretches on and on and on. But those are anomalies. This year, I believe once we get to late August, a switch will be flipped on. That will look a lot different, and we'll have a very busy time ahead. And if not, that's all the more good. It's good for you. Me too. I live on the coast. Don't want to exclude me. By the way, I hate to bring this up, but you can also see the smoke coming back in from those wildfires. I thought we were done with that. Nope. The weather just keeps on coming, doesn't it? Of course it does. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. All right. So yes, very interesting times ahead. We're in August. Hey, look, a lot of this, not necessarily good news, a lot of these big, bold forecasts. But just remember, you have a lot of power in terms of what you do. You're not helpless. Look at your local situation, where you live, your preparedness, like financially, and just try to do something. Don't just sit back and say, oh, I'm doomed if we have a big hurricane where I am finished. That's not necessarily true. You do have some control when this news comes out that it could be a very busy season. Please don't look at it as being something to despair over. And I've said this before, maybe I should saying it more again. Look at this as a gift that we are seeing things before they happen, potentially, and we have the power to do something about it. I think that's a wonderful part of science, and we should all take advantage of that. So don't necessarily look at this as all bad news. I try not to be all doom and gloom, but look, when the news is bad, remember, you still have options. There are no hurricane warnings right now. Nobody's under threat of anything. So whatever your situation is, just try to think about, what will I do if we have something coming my way? Everybody's different. So just keep that in mind, all right? There's a little positivity here. Let's use the science to our advantage. All right? That is it for me for today. You guys have a good rest of your Wednesday. As always, thanks for tuning in and giving me a part of your day. I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack. We'll be back tomorrow with more.